Richard.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. As I said, welcome to the Wallace Collection Online and to Reflections on Forgotten Masters. I'm delighted today to welcome renowned writer and scholar William Dalrymple alongside the director of the Wallace Collection, Xavier Bray. Today they're going to be reflecting on what's been a hugely successful exhibition for the Wallace Collection, perhaps touching upon whether they feel that they've achieved everything they wanted to do with the exhibition, and also, I suppose, casting a lens or a new lens on the exhibition in the light of recent anti-racism movements. So without further ado, I will hand you over to Xavier and William.
Thank you so much, Andrew, and welcome to everybody. I see there are many people from India, from America, from Europe, and it's a great pleasure to have you with us. As you all know, the exhibition was meant to close in April, but we had to close even earlier because of COVID-19. Of course, it was a great, sad day for us. We were reaching a good 50,000 visitors. It was one of the most successful exhibitions that we've been able to mount in the last few years, and the catalogue was selling extremely well. Thank God we've been able to reopen in the last few weeks, and we're going to be open until the 13th of September. So for those who haven't seen the exhibition yet, do book online, and we are going to be extending our opening hours in September. So we are on the path to recovery, it's safe to say. But this afternoon really is a great opportunity to talk to William and ask him how what he's learnt since the exhibition was put on, since the catalogue has been published, how it's been received, and not only in his own world but also back in India. We are accompanied here. I think William is now up in Scotland with his parakeet. Willie, is that right, William?
William, my brother's parrot called William, named so that he could teach the parrot to say, "Shut up, William." But I'm glad to say the parrot is far too intelligent to indulge in such extravagances.
So I have no assistance from that point of view. But I just wanted to really start very briefly. I mean, just to sort of set the scene. We received extremely good reviews when we opened the show. Let me try and get this working again. Hold on. I've lost the controls. I don't seem to be able to get to the... Sorry.
Your mastery of technology is always.
Well, I can't get to view. Here we go.
One of the joys of this.
It's when you go on Zoom, it doesn't seem to work. So I just want to say that when we did open the exhibition, it was a revelation to the public. The press was incredibly enthusiastic. Jonathan Jones from The Guardian, who normally is extremely critical of any exhibition that's put on by our national museums, said that this was, the greatest natural history artworks of all time that were reunited here, and about time that these great artists were reconsidered as geniuses as such. And one of the key images is, of course, this wonderful bat by Bhavani Das that has been lent very generously by the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And many of us, those who had never seen such wonderful works, the idea of these beautiful animals set against a white page and the orchestration around it, this idea of showing and displaying as much as possible in terms of the meticulous detail. Many of us were reminded of the great German artist Albrecht Durer, particularly, in this case, the wonderful hair in terms of the attention of detail, but also this use of the white page and not being afraid of just showing the object, the sort of focus in all its glory. So I think there's been right from the beginning a sense of rediscovery, but also connecting with a kind of art history that we almost feel we've seen before. And Willie, I don't know, I mean, this is how we met, really. You have always been interested in these wonderful images, and you pulled out your iPhone one evening and showed me these incredible images. But from a personal point of view, what makes you very excited about these images?
What I've always loved is the fact that, so often in art history, there's that feeling that everything has been written about, everything has been discovered, everything has been published. And I've been aware that there's been this whole genre, which used to be described as company school painting, which has never received a single major exhibition in this country. There was one very cursory exhibition in 1978 in the United States. Great Stuart Carey Welsh organized it. But many of the masterworks that have appeared since then on the market have never been shown at all, and they exist entirely in private collections. I was very, very excited to try and bring them all together. And I mean, to be honest, I never thought we would manage to do it. And you worked with incredible speed. And I think from the first conversation we had to the opening day was, what, 18 months maximum? And the beauty of the design and the planning which you put up was beyond my wildest dreams. So for me, this has been, you know, the completion of a live stream, really, and I'm just thrilled that the rest of the public has seen the point.
So the main objective was to bring back to the fore these great masters, Indian painters trained in a Mogul style, back to the sort of art historical sort of criteria. But of course, it's all against a very disturbing historical background, that of the East India Company, which of course you have been working on for the last few years, and you've just published your book, The Anarchy. And in a way, this is the sort of soft power side of the East India Company. But maybe before we go into the full sort of artistic reappraisal of these great artists, perhaps we should sort of set the scene as to how these artists came about being commissioned, these works of art.
So what we have in front of us in this slide here is the headquarters of the East India Company in the mid-18th century. And as you can see, it's a very modest building. It's just 5 windows wide. It's not even the 2 buildings on either side. It's just this one Georgian building set back from the street behind railings. And from that building, with a skeleton staff that 100 years after its founding was only 35 people in the head office, the richest country of the world was brought to its knees, and piece by piece was absorbed, conquered, looted, asset stripped. And it's the most extraordinary story. When the company was founded in 1600, England controlled about 7% of the world's gross domestic product, while the Mughal Empire controlled about 45% of the world's domestic product. William the Parrot is currently breaking up porcelain in the background, but a rather East India Company-ish man. Might have to go rescue him in a second. And he did instead, he just ripped the catalogue to William, the East India Company didn't use white manpower to conquer India. In a very ruthless fashion. I'm worried he's going to break my brother's porcelain. I don't know what to do with him at the moment. Anyway, in this very ruthless manner, they employed Indian soldiers. Yeah. Cage you somewhere. They employed Indian soldiers financed by loans from Indian bankers. In this way, 95% of the manpower of the East India Company's private armies was Indian. The loans were given by people like the Jagat Sets, and it was an astonishing operation of great ruthlessness, employing Indian money and Indian manpower to conquer Indians. And it did so in a very short period, in less than 50 years, between 1765, the Battle of Plassey, and 1803. We've got here, realize the scale of the East India Company's reach. They were building, these are the docks now where East India Dock and Canada, the kind of main headquarters of the Daily Telegraph is almost where this picture is taken from by Daniels. It shows if you can wind on to the next picture, you get an idea of their, these were East India Company clippers were being built in Brunswick Dock. It was a vast operation. By the 1780s, they were growing opium in China, in India, selling it in China, buying tea in China, which they were then selling in India, in Europe, and in America. This is the Boston Tea Party. And so you have the East India Company tea being poured into Boston Harbor. And it's a measure of the global reach of this company, that it was able to operate on all these different continents. And at this stage, had turned into the largest narco operation in history. This was makes the Medellin cartel look like rank amateurs. Nothing that Pablo Escobar did compared to the massive opium smuggling and dealing of the East India Company, all against Chinese law. It had its own flag. It was an empire within an empire. And great chunks of the globe was controlled not by the British Crown, but by the East India Company. Not just most of India, but Burma, what's now Dubai, Oman, Somalia, was all controlled from the two headquarters, Leadenhall Street, that tiny building we saw in the City of London, and the Viceroy's headquarters in Calcutta. And at the same time that it was exploiting, asset stripping, and looting, it also was much closer to its Indian backers and Indian soldiers than the later Raj. We have this image of the Raj being, you know, east is east and west is west, and never the twain shall meet. And you've got this world, you know, familiar from Kipling, where the white-only clubs in the Raj and civil lines and no contact. The East India Company was different from that. In the 1780s, 1 in 3 East India Company men was married to an Indian woman. This man, John Wombwell, is typical, wearing Indian clothes. He's a Yorkshire chartered accountant, but as you can see, he's dressed up like a Nawab. And this crossing of cultures went in two directions. I think the next slide shows the Kashmiri saltpeter dealer who was in business with the company, Ashraf Ali Khan. Now, he's a Kashmiri. He's wearing Kashmiri dress, although he's sitting in Patna, where his factory was based. But you can see that he's sitting in a Georgian chair, and he has his very Mughal teapoy on a very Mughal hookah, water pipe, on a teapoy stand. And his girlfriend, next slide, Mutabay, is dressed in a similar manner, sitting on a chair with her water pipe. So these things were going in two directions. Many Europeans were taking on Indian fashions, Indian ways of living, and many Brits were taking on Indian modes of living. So it's a different thing from the Raj. There's no pretense at a civilizational mission or building, you know, the railways to save India or anything like this. The East India Company was only about profits to the shareholders, but at the same time as being enormously exploitative and looting the country, it did so in collaboration with the banking classes and a portion of the elite. And its armies were 95% Indian. So it's a strange thing. And in this age when we have giant corporations like Amazon and Facebook and ExxonMobil, whose incomes are far greater than most nation states, the East India Company is a precedent for this monstrous form of joint stock company, who exist ostensibly to trade, but actually have vast powers and can overthrow entire countries, which is what, of course, the East India Company did.
But among the members of the East India Company were the men of the Enlightenment, men of the sort of 18th century rationale, who were keen to catalogue, categorize, discover, explore, and open up learning as such. And I think, I mean, a lot of them seem to have been surgeons. I think they took a great interest in botany and medicine. And it seems that with the trade going on in the backdrop, there were certainly people taking the opportunity to open up new avenues of
Well, I think you've got to be quite careful there and draw a distinction between the East India Company and its employees. The East India Company was absolutely ruthless. It was not interested in setting up hospitals or institutions of learning. It set up botanic gardens, but only, as far as it was concerned, you know, to find plants that it could sell and make money from. However, in the process, you find educated Scottish surgeons coming out and seeing this as an opportunity for them to make their living. This is the same age as, you know, Joseph Banks is setting up Kew, that Linnaeus is busy cataloguing all the flora and fauna of Scandinavia and giving every genus Latin names, and his whole method of classification of plants. And people trained in this methodology, this new Enlightenment interest, were getting jobs in the East India Company and on their own back doing this study outside office hours. Very little of this learning was taking place sponsored by the company itself. Nonetheless, the company did provide employment in India for educated and enlightened people who did take advantage of it, who happened, many of whom were married to Indian women, many of whom were interested in Indian culture. And while the company, I think you can look at overwhelmingly as this entirely negative corporate monster, many within it were surprisingly enlightened figures who began employing not just the Indian painters that we're going to see over the next half hour, but also, were sponsors of Indian poets, took an interest in Indian dance, began digging archaeologically and translating Kharoshthi inscriptions and discovering the ancient past of Ashoka and the whole Buddhist period of Indian history, which has been forgotten. So it's a complicated period. It isn't black and white, this period. And the pictures that we have shown in this show come from this curious bit of the interface. They're the product of this monstrous corporation, but very rarely actually commissioned directly by the company itself. Almost all of them were commissioned by individual figures who were, contrary to expectation, interested and charmed and seduced by the different pleasures of Indian civilization and the natural world in India.
So here we have one of the most fascinating images in the exhibition. In the first room of the exhibition, a portrait, a self-portrait of an artist we think is Mazhar Ali Khan, who predominantly worked in Delhi. It's part of a larger book that has a sort of different professions within Indian society. And in this case, this is the picture Muchi, the artist. Now, as somebody who studied European art and the whole concept of the individuality of the artist, the idea of the self-portrait, are we seeing here one of the first examples of Indian artists depicting themselves as individual, or is that something that was very much part of the Mogul tradition?
No, you do find it in the Mogul tradition, and many of the great artists like Govardhan left astonishing self-portraits that survive in, often they're in the margins or at the back of pictures. Sometimes they're self-consciously humbling themselves by putting themselves right at the bottom of a frame, or possibly, next to an elephant or in the corner or something like this. Some of them are, some of these pictures are often begging letters. The artist holds scrolls asking the emperor for favors or pensions. So there is a tradition of self-portraits, but they're all right that there's far less of the Enlightenment European idea of the individuality of the artist. There is, while there are self-portraits, they're rarer. And in this period, during company patronage, there are only 2 or 3 that we know of, and 2 are in the show. This wonderful self-portrait that may or may not be Mazhar Ali Khan. It's a Delhi artist. And what's interesting about this is you can see that it is itself hybrid. He's sitting in the position that Mughal artists sat, which is leaning back against a bolster, though this is interestingly a European bolster rather than the round Indian bolsters used in Indian courts. It's more like a European cushion. He's sitting with one leg propped up, and the paper is resting on a wooden stand on his knee, on a wooden board on his knee. But he has got European spectacles, and on either side of his Mogul paints, which are in the center of the painting, in little round oyster shells, there are 2 European boxes containing Western watercolors. And these were among the first Western watercolor kits imported into India. So here, in a sense, you have a symbol of everything that we're showing in the show. It is a hybrid way of working, using hybrid materials in a hybrid style on English watercolor paper by Indian artists. And it is this coming together of worlds that produces something that is so unusual. There's been a question just popped up, how do we know it's watercolor? Because you can actually see the watercolor set in the left-hand box. If you look in the left-hand box, there is a little white area with 3 round circles of watercolor paint. And also by studying the watercolors, but sorry, by studying the materials that these pictures are painted in, we can confirm that these are indeed watercolors. And we have references to Western watercolor kits being imported at this period. This is a Western watercolor kit. Indians did not make these styles of pigment. The traditional Indian method of painting was to take mineral pigments such as lapis or a particular kind of yellow allegedly made by feeding cows mangoes and then taking the urine and drying it, or using coal black from lamps as black, or chalk for the white, and so on. And using these mineral pigments and mixing them with gum arabic in an oyster shell. And that's what's going on in the middle. So you've got both methods at once being used for these pictures. And here we actually have a very rare picture of what would once have been called a company painter, painting in the company style in this hybrid materials in a hybrid fashion.
So, I mean, what's fascinating again to the European eye is, as you said, the way he's sitting there. He's not at his easel. He's got the album nicely sort of positioned against his knee.
It's a single leaf. The album would be bound later. So you take a single leaf and put it onto a wooden board.
But then he's removed his slippers, almost like, you know, when you enter a mosque, out of respect for this moment of creativity. And I suppose that the next slide, which is, I have to say, one of my favorite images in the exhibition, is this wonderful self-portrait by Yelapa from Vellore. And he's sitting there similarly at this sort of improvised little desk. And he's got his colors laid out again, a bit like the Ali Khan portrait, but we also have one of his assistants holding the actual album from which this page is taken. So there's this wonderful sort of sophistication of visual sort of trickery almost, which would have satisfied enormously, I'm sure, the original patron of this album. But for me,
and what's lovely is it's a measure of, in a sense, how far we're, you know, changing understanding of this period, even with the show, is that this is the first time that Yelapa has actually been named. His body of work has long been known, and he had a very particular style, which is in the major collections like the VM and the V&A. But it always used to be referred to generally as Tanjore school. People guessed it was from somewhere in the south, and because Tanjore had this artistic tradition, almost by default, it was called Tanjore school work. Now we know that there is this one particular artist, this picture, Yelapa. I think we've even got a close-up of his face in the next slide. And you can see this very distinguished-looking chap, but he's got pock marks. He obviously had smallpox when he was a child. And he looks directly at the viewer with a look of great dignity and pride in his work. I think you can see it in that face. He meets your gaze directly. And it's fantastic to suddenly now be able to put a name and an identity to this body of work, which has long lain in national collections, but has never been shown, rarely been published. And it was the case for all these artists. We know there's a question, what date is this? This is 1820s to 1830s was Yelapa's period, working out of Vellore, but also moving around the towns of the south and indeed visiting Tanjore on occasion.
So, I mean, can I just say something? Yeah. Of course, the caste system very much defined Indian society at the time, and to a certain extent still today. The picture muchis, as they were called, and we know that Yelapa came from the leather making or leather works caste. Is that correct?
It is correct. I mean, in general, Indian artists tended not to come from the elite castes of society. They tended to be from the lower down, particularly the Hindu ones. Artists in Rajput courts were often the same people that were carpenters. Many doubled up. They were, you could be a carpenter some part of the year, paint at other times, and sometimes do both at the same time on a single job. We have painted temples in the north where the same artist has worked on the woodwork and on the painting. Mm. So carpenter caste is often the case with Pahari artists, and in the south many of them seem to be leather workers, muchis, which is very low down the social scale. But what's interesting about Yelapa is that he may have been technically fairly low. Yeah, William has just destroyed something over the rest of the room. I might have to go and rescue him for a minute. He's knocked over a whole bowl of apples outside the room. Anyway, he's now gone back to his perch, saying he's going to behave. Yes, there was a variety of different castes, and Yelapa may well have been very well off, and been a successful painter, but he was still from probably this leather working class, which was technically Dalit or untouchable.
And could you say that if an artist such as Yelapa receives patronage from a foreigner, in this case, somebody possibly from the East India Company, could you say that they could sort of see themselves coming out of the caste system? Is there any way you could break away from it, or is that something that you just would not expect whatsoever in 18?
No, I think at this period in history, I mean, caste was not fixed and immutable, but it was pretty tight even at this period. I mean, there are cases of people from low caste even taking the, for example, some of the kings of Vijayanagara, the great southern Hindu kingdom, some of the greatest kings there were from lower classes. They weren't from warrior caste. The same is sometimes true of Maratha leaders. So caste was not fixed, but it did pretty well lock you into a certain profession and a certain strata of marriage. So you'd marry within your caste, your children would take on your profession, and so on. So Yelapa might well have become personally well off, but that wouldn't mean that he could suddenly go and hang out with people from the warrior caste or something like that. No, caste is a complex business.
So,
but Yelapa was interesting because what he did was that he, in the 1820s and 30s, seems to have set himself up with his own studio and taken jobbing work, may even have knocked on doors and sought commissions. And unlike some of the artists we're going to look at in the next half an hour, who were given commissions and brought together by specific patrons and given a body of work, Yelapa seems to have taken the initiative and had the agency, and seems to have gone around offering his services. Particularly, for example, we have one album in the exhibition where it's clearly the commandant of the Sepoy regiment based in Vellore Fort. And he paints the commandant palanquin, and then he paints a variety of the peoples of Tanjore, the pujaris who were in the temple, the different mendicants, the different craftsmen and workmen. So he was his own master. And there's another artist in the show, also from the period of 1820s and 30s, called Sheikh Mohammed Amir of Karia, who was doing the same thing in Calcutta and had obviously a large studio with lots of people working under him.
So we'll come back to these two artists, Yelapa and Sheikh Mohammed Amir, in a minute. But I think what will be very useful now is to look at some of the great individuals who were, in part responsible for these commissions. And one of them being a figure that I am completely fascinated about, a Frenchman, somebody called Claude Martin, originally from Lyon, who settled in India and worked first of all for the French East India Company. You have to remember that there wasn't just the British, but of course the Dutch and the French versions, and they were all sort of competing for trade. But this man changed sides and joined the British side, and did extremely well. He eventually became an advisor to the Nawab of Lucknow. Is that correct, Willie?
Correct. He ran the Nawab's armaments. He minted coins. He made pistols and cannon, often of a higher quality than the standard issue East India Company ones. And he was a very clever wheeler and dealer. He's the sort of character that you meet in Le Carré novels in sort of republics of Africa, who close to government, lending money, dealing in all different kinds of goods and making a fortune. And in the next slides, I think we have some of Claude Martin's different houses. This was his house, which was named after Lyon, the Chateau de Lyon, on the waterfront of the Gompti in Lucknow. A lot of the travel in India in these pages would be mainly by boat rather than by road, as the roads were so bad. And Claude Martin could be imagined moving around in these boats. And then he built his at the end, this extraordinary building, Constantia, 1 second, I am going to actually retrieve William back to his cage. Wait,
I'll carry on. So this is Constantia, which still exists and happens to be now a school named after Martin de Martinière. And I'm dying to visit Lucknow, and unfortunately, it's still. I mean, it's very much there. It's not.
Yes, it was both a mausoleum and a fortress building. He built a tomb for himself in the basement, but the main building was designed to be defensible, including some all sorts of sort of special effects, like there's some East India Company lions, which are about 15 foot tall, on the facade. And he had a whole pyrotechnics system lined up so that if there was an attack at night, the flames could be made to come out of the lions' heads with fire gushing out of them and scaring people off. It was all a very extravagant fantasy. And of course, after his death, it became the La Martinière School that he left money to in his will. There's 3 La Martinière schools, all functioning to this day. The one in this building, La Martinière Lucknow, one in Calcutta, and one in Lyon. Anyway, this man lived in this extraordinary Enlightenment environment. Here he's seen with his friend Antoine Polier and Johann Zoffany. Zoffany, the only member of the Royal Academy known to have been a cannibal. He ate one of his fellow crew members when he was shipwrecked on his way home from India. And as you can see, this is a world where they are examining Indian fruits, looking at Indian artworks, painting pictures of India. Claude Martin imported to Lucknow medical books. At one point, he had bad stomach aches, decided that he had an appendix problem, and operated on himself to remove his own appendix in accordance with some instructions that he'd read about in a medical journal. 3 years later, he read about the Montgolfier brothers putting up a balloon in Paris, and then with the descriptions in the scientific journals that arrived in Lucknow, he built his own hot air balloon and put his own hot air balloon into the air out of La Martinière property in Lucknow. So, I mean, an extraordinary figure. And so this guy, friends with Polier on the left, Polier was employing Mughal artists who he treated in his letters in a rather peremptory manner. People who we regard, like Mir Kalan Khan, who we regard as great masters today. Polier was writing very sort of peremptory instructions to in his letters, all of which survive in the Bibliothèque Nationale in Paris. And it's probably through Polier that Claude Martin had the idea of doing, in a sense, what was the Great Enlightenment project, which was to measure and classify the earth. And we know that Claude Martin had imported to Lucknow, I think, 10 volumes of Les Oiseaux de France, this enormous, large, coffee table style books and lithographs of French birds. And it may well have been Claude Martin who was the first to employ Mughal art to paint images in the style of these lithographs. In the course of the research of this exhibition, our colleague Henry Nolte of the Scottish Botanic Gardens in Edinburgh found a whole boxes of images in Kew Gardens that not only had not been recognized as Claude Martin's, they had never been classified, they had never been accessioned, let alone published. So the first time they've ever appeared in print is in the catalogue edition.
No, and it's for us, it's particularly exciting, and in a way, it's what managed to allow the Wallace to do the exhibition. This relationship with Claude Martin, as you can imagine, when I presented the exhibition to our trustees, they were wondering why an Indian exhibition in one of the strongholds of 18th century French paintings and decorative arts, as well as great armor that we have here at the Wallace Collection in London. But among our great collection is this very beautiful Mogul dagger. And we have many more great examples of Sikh armor, Mughal, Ottoman, but probably one of the greatest collections of Middle Eastern armor. But among them is this dagger that dates around 1620. The handle is made out of rock crystal. It's got emeralds and agate stones of most astonishing quality. But what was astonishing is that on very close inspection, even photography can't get it. You have to handle it and get the light correct. But inscribed, scratched into the rock crystal is the name Claude Martin. So this is the linchpin really to the exhibition, around which we have shown some of the earlier sort of company paintings as such of in this case, a lotus flower. And Mr. Nolte, Henry Nolte, who's been catalogued these, sent me this photograph with proof, something that, you know, some people had, you know, for a long time were not sure about, but the proof that these indeed were part of a Claude Martin album that he would have commissioned and then has since been broken up. This is one of Willie's favourites images that comes from the
one of the finest in the whole show, I think. I know Xavier is a great fan of it too.
But I think,
and this is the first generation of these paintings. This could have been indeed, you know, the first time that a European patron asked a Mogul artist to paint a natural history picture. What you see here is, you know, this incredible detail that we're used to from artists like Mansour when he painted natural history painting. But while Mansour and the Mogul natural history tradition used to set their birds in paradise landscapes with butterflies and irises and lotuses and so on. In this one, we have it against this 18th century white background, just like you would in Les Oiseaux de France or any of the big Aubadon or any of the, you know, the classics, any of Joseph Banks's books of South Sea herbals and botanicals. And this, you see, is the hybrid version. This is what possibly preceded it. In the Lucknow painting tradition, if you had an image of a Nawab or a mullah, or a local dignitary, they'd often be painted at this period in these sort of tiny landscapes where trees and rivers and so on appear miniature in the background, so that the person sort of rises like a giant out of the landscape. And you have the same impression of a sort of Godzilla creature, this adjutant stalk rising sort of disproportionately massive, like King Kong from the Gomti Plains. This is the first generation, and I think then the second generation is what we saw last, the hawk, all probably from the Claude Martin collection. But now, yeah, we move on to Claude Martin's friend Elijah Impey. And in the Chester Beatty in Dublin, we have a picture that belonged to Elijah Impey that has the stamp of Claude Martin in the back. So in other words, these two friends were interested in the same things. They were passing pictures to each other. And it's probably the example of Claude Martin that encouraged Elijah Impey and his wife here, Lady Impey, seen here choosing a hat in her Calcutta drawing room. The shutters are barred. It's probably a very hot summer day. There are Derzies making chikan work. There are men from the garden bringing in vegetables and fruit for her inspection. And this is a kind of a Mem Saab's day. But Lady Impey's great love was nature. And we know that she kept a nature diary at home in Oxfordshire before she came out to India. And installed in the Chief Justice's house next to, the park, of which Park Street in Calcutta is the remnant, was originally the park at the back of the Impey's house. And so South Park Street Cemetery and Park Street today are remnants of the park where Lady Impey's animals were kept. And at some point in the late 1770s and early 1780s, she got three master artists who had probably all been working in the Mogul court in Rashidabad, but who were most recently resident in Patna, now Bihar, to come down to Calcutta and to spend 2 or 3 years resident in her house, painting her menagerie. And these, I mean, for many people, the greatest pictures in the show and the greatest examples of the genre, including the bat that we already saw by the one who does.
These are from an Indian eye, the idea of watching these English people in their living room, the way they live, the way they decorate their house. They're incredible sort of documents, visual documents. I mean, particularly the next slide where you see the Impey children running around, nice and white. They haven't got any sunburn or anything like that, and they're being looked up to Indian ayahs. One is even being fed by the breast here, breastfed. I mean, it's an astonishing account, really. And is this how these East India Company people lived? Is that, do we know how they operated as such?
Yes, I think this is a particularly telling image, because here you have a kind of brand new Georgian house, and it's completely empty inside. You know, the Indians have just arrived. All you can see at the back here are 2 cots with sort of improvised mosquito nets on either side. Otherwise, there's nothing in the room. This is the nursery, and the children are on the floor. There's pets, a little dog. There's a toy dog, I think, or a toy deer just next to one of the ayahs. And this is the background against which one of the very greatest of these commissions, arguably the greatest natural history paintings in Indian history, were commissioned. And this is one that sadly eluded us. The V&A wouldn't lend us. This is Lady Impey's shawl goat, which was one we were very keen to have, but never made it to the show, sadly. But many others did.
I mean, what I find astonishing about these images of animals is that they, one, are very good at posing for the artist. They seem to be very still, unlike your William the Parrot in the background, who specific attention. But there is a real sense of being able to capture these animals in true essence, and yet keep them still and poised and framed within the page of the book. And this is this wonderful Malabar squirrel eating a nut from a tree. And what's fascinating is how the right, something that maybe you probably knew about, but when you look at the exhibition and see it in the flesh, and you go back to it, you notice a lot of writing on these pages, lots of annotations that give you the size of the animal, the size of their feet, the size of their paw, the whiskers, and then they're actually signed by the artist. So, I mean, that's the real sense of collaboration here between the patron and the artist in categorizing, cataloging these animals.
And then you get the different languages. I mean, with this one, for example, the Urdu says simply Pahari Chua, which means mountain rat. It's the only word in Urdu here. But I love the kind of way he's nibbling the nut. One sees the nut being nibbled, and then the little caterpillar on the branch on the right, marching away from the scene before it's noted by the mountain. And then these gorgeous birds, all in the Ashmolean. All by Sheikh Zainuddin, who's the greatest of these master artists.
And in terms of, I mean, something we haven't done in the exhibition is to actually compare them visually with the images that you mentioned from the French Book of Birds, but also Linnaeus. What I find about these birds is that the way that they're captured within the page. So, for example, this stork, in order to keep it within the page, she's managed to bend the neck round. There's a sense of artistic license almost in terms of controlling the animal and fitting them in. This is something that I'm very interested in as from an Indian artistic point of view, this idea of invention, of breaking the rules. Where do we stand on that? Is there such a thing of breaking academic rules within?
I don't think he's breaking any rules, and I think there's a great sense of beauty in that curve. It appears almost like one of those perfect Japanese prints that you see of the same gorgeous storks in Japanese art. And what I'm interested also is the kind of different hierarchy. Sheikh Zainuddin, who was the senior most artist, gets to paint all the star animals like the fancy birds, the leopard, the pangolin. And then you get a kind of sense of hierarchy. And below him comes Bhawani Das, who gets given the creepy crawlies, the bats, the fish, and the slightly slimier things. And then there's Ramdas, who gets the leftovers even from Bhawani Das. So this is almost like an entire David Attenborough picture here. You can see a whole David Attenborough program. You start in the center with the caterpillar who's nibbling a leaf. You can see the leaf is so nibbled, there's a great sort of vent up the middle of it. Then on the left of that, you've got a cocoon hanging from the leaf when the caterpillar goes into the cocoon, and then he bursts out into this gorgeous butterfly or moth seen here. It's a moth rather than a butterfly. In fact, I think it's a silk moth specifically, which again is interesting from the East India Company point of view, because they were trading silk. And then finally the bird turns up and perhaps eats the moth. So you get an entire life cycle taking place here. And Sheikh Zainuddin seems to be interested in this whole the natural world rather than just the sheer artistic presence of these animals.
No, it's very interesting, this sort of cycle of life, but at the same time, a great wit that accompanies some of these images. Again, the more you look at them, the more, and I suppose, I mean, the next steps really, I mean, while we are laying out this extraordinary material, and I wish I was, you know, a good 20 years younger to embark on a PhD on Sheikh Zainuddin, but where are we in the terms of scholarship, William? Are there Indian scholars working on this? Are there American scholars, European scholars working on this material?
Virtually no one has worked on this. The great pioneer in the field was Mildred Archer, who published a book called Company Painting, which was a translation of the Urdu phrase Company Kalam that she came across in Patna. Toby Falk, who worked with her on the Fraser paintings, also died fairly young and never really lived to complete it. There are a few other scholars that have done a little work, but it is one of the great, you know, under-published areas of not only Indian art, but all art. I mean, these, you know, as Jonathan Jones said, these are some of the greatest natural history paintings ever painted. But astonishingly, there's never been a single monograph on, for example, the Impey collection. You know, it's crying out for work and for study. Andrew Topsfield, who did the essay on the Impeys for the catalogue, was, you know, breaking new ground when he was even just classifying the different dates with which each set of pictures were painted by each artist. It's the first time that basic work had been done. So if I was a young PhD student watching this video, I would, you know, put in my application quick to begin work on this, because this is one of the very few areas of completely uncharted masterpieces.
Yeah.
And once you read our catalogue and read Mildred Archer, you're pretty well on your own.
I mean, this particular image of the Indian roller for me is probably one of the most beautiful images in the exhibition, and we were very lucky to borrow it. It's just been acquired by the Minneapolis Museum of Art. But what's astonishing about it is the condition of it. You know, some of these pages have been seen in too much light and they've lost their intensity. But this one, particularly this wonderful combination of the watercolor and then the Indian technique of using gum arabic as a sort of oil. It means that the leaves have that wonderful depth, and the way they curl back into our space. There's almost a sort of trompe-l'oeil effect. I mean, they really are of astonishing quality.
No, I mean, and these ones, there was a gentleman in Texas who had made a fortune from selling the sperm of bulls. He apparently cornered the market and mistook one of these for a Japanese painting and bought it. He collected Japanese art, and he was so astonished by it that he collected a whole set. And by the end, the Clarks had, I think, 20 Impey paintings, which is the largest single holding of any private collection in the world. And include this, incidentally, rather sort of ominously, without realizing it, when you were hanging the show, Xavier, you put the bats and the pangolins into what can now only be called COVID corner of this exhibition.
It's true. And I have to say, one of the great moments during the exhibition run was that Sir David Attenborough came to see the exhibition. He's always loved these images. He knew all about Lady Impey and her menagerie, which one should presume he should, but he was particularly taken aback by the pangolin, which of course is a species that is much endangered at the moment, and he's been very actively protecting it. But he was very interested on the
wet markets.
Sorry?
Not least in Chinese wet markets where
Yes.
they've been.
But he was very interested to see how the Indian artists here, in this case, had managed to capture the way a pangolin actually walks with the claws curled in. So again, it's an exhibition that would be fascinating to go around with a botanist, but also somebody who really knows their fauna and great understanding of the animal kingdom, to sort of see to what extent these artists were able to capture reality. And he was quite critical of the Bhavani Das bat, for example, saying that the bone structure wasn't quite accurate. So there's something there.
I think, was the better botanist.
Yeah, here it is. Here's the bat. That I think he didn't quite see how this connection, the joints didn't quite work, and needed to be fully studied by a true bat expert. But William, you have the thing that really seduced me in terms of doing this exhibition was your description of this male bat. And I'll let you, I don't want to quote you on this, but it still rings so beautifully. So I'll give you the honor of...
Thank you, Xavier. It looked to me like a sort of Venetian commendatore ushering a woman into a box of the opera in Venice. It's got all the dash and panache of some rather wicked Venetian seducer. And it's almost impossible to imagine that this fantastically male bat is only a creature in a colonial menagerie. He's got enough panache to sink the entire East India Company, I thought.
But from a student's point of view, the idea of being able to see the wing extended and then the wing brought back in, it's just such a great solution, visual solution from the artist's point of view of not only fitting it on the page, but just showing how the bones and the tendons and the musculature actually operate. So it would have been a very useful image to those studying these albums back in England, which presumably was also the purpose of these albums. They were brought back and used and looked at. I mean, we know the Lady Impey made her collection where they lived just outside Lewes available to scientists and botanists and all kinds of professors. Is that correct?
That's right, and it's interesting that a lot of the Scots botanists who were working, they were trained up in Edinburgh, got their jobs in the East India Company. They would make 2 copies of each picture, and they'd send one back to Edinburgh, or sometimes 3, one to Kew, one to Edinburgh, and they'd keep one in Calcutta. And one of the things I saw since the exhibition opened was the incredible collection that still remains in the Calcutta Botanic Gardens. Yeah, really? If ever we have a successor exhibition to this, it would be wonderful to get the actual ones that remained in Calcutta, which are a tiny bit larger than many of the botanic ones in Kew. They are the scale of the Impey pictures from these very large A3 sheets of paper. And are often fantastically detailed. So you have this sort of, the question of multiple, what's the word? The motivations of these guys. You have a man who is employed by a vicious, monstrous multinational to find commercially viable plants, and that's what the Botanic Garden's there to grow: coffee, turmeric, opium. And all these sort of things that can be made and money can be made from. Mangoes, this is things that the East India Company was thinking of diversifying into. But at the same time, you have individual Scottish botanists who are fascinated by the work of Linnaeus, who realize that they're on the cutting edge of science and have a possibility of making a contribution to science. And they're using the company, in a sense, for their own ends of studying the natural world. And so you have many different motives at play behind the art of these things. This is the extraordinary, almost surreal image of the efflorescence of a pandanus plant. And we have the main plant in the show too, which is another wonderful image. Yeah. But look at the kind of, this reminds me very much of the Kaligat gods painted in the Kaligat temple in Calcutta. And I wonder whether many of the artists that worked on the Kaligat paintings were working also on this. Incidentally, the Kaligat greatly influenced Léger, the French artist, when he was at work, and the way that they do the corners and the edges here has a sort of Léger-like feel.
From a sort of artistic contemporary almost view, I mean, there's a sort of abstraction of form here, of sort of summary, as a simplification of form, to the extent that you could be almost looking at a George O'Keeffe painting here. And I mean, we have had artists come around the exhibition, but we haven't had the young contemporary set yet, because I don't think they've realized.
We had, funny enough, I took the leading Indian contemporary artist Subodh Gupta around last week.
Okay.
And Subodh who studied in Patna, was commenting on on all the Bihari scenes, and the thing that particularly interested him was the rats, which he said were eaten in his home village.
Oh, really? How interesting. Well, that brings me on to a question. I mean, of course, we've had some wonderful exchanges with the Indian community here, and some of our main sponsors happen to be the DAG, Delhi Art Gallery. But the exhibition is ending here, there has been a lot of interest, but my dream, my feeling, which should be that it should go to India. How do you think the Indian public would react to such an exhibition?
Well, I think it would be as much a surprise to the Indian public as it has been to the British public. I mean, the reason that these pictures have never been seen is they don't fit any national narrative. They're not, the British are embarrassed about their empire, and they tend to have it boxed up and hidden away behind all the loot they took is not on show, but it's hidden away embarrassingly in vaults and reserve collections. In India, these are not regarded as great masterpieces of Indian art. They're regarded as something sort of semi-colonial. So we have, they're stuck between worlds. They don't tell anyone's story. And I think that's the reason that we've never seen this properly. This is a fascinating picture, incidentally. In the South, there were far fewer Mogul artists. And so the company was not able to draw on that very particular skill set Mogul artists had for close representation. And in the South, they often use kalamkari artists, as is the case of this artist, Rugged, who was from the Andhra coast. And you can see that the same styles that he would have used for scroll work in his kalamkari paintings, taking these, what Henry Nolte calls taking these scrolls for a dance into the corners of the paintings, filling all these white spaces with pattern, while at the same time fulfilling his remit to be scientifically accurate, is a very different tradition of paintings to that hyperrealism and the three-dimensionality with that sort of trompe l'oeil effect you were talking about that one sees in some of the Mogul work. I'm afraid my own menagerie is playing up here. I'm going to have to go and let the dog out now. 1 second.
Okay, well, I'll carry on if I can without you. I think some of these images speak for themselves.
William the parrot is still on the loose, and I will introduce you to him at the end of this talk, if we have time.
We should show some of our favorite images here. This is the Funky Gibbons by Haludar, another great artist that's come out from this exhibition. Of course, any time we could find a name to give an attribution to these images, we did. And this, again, is very much the tip of the iceberg. But again, this is where, when David Attenborough saw this, he said this is exactly how gibbons walk. They need to use their arms to balance, because their legs are so small as they walk forwards. I mean, it's but the sheer beauty of the detailing that Haludar is able to.
The mice that Subodh said his villagers used to eat as special delicacies in his body. Haludar, incidentally, was employed by Lord Wellesley, the Governor General, at his menagerie in Barrackpore, which was the weekend retreat of the Governor General. And again, Francis Buchanan, I think, was the boss of the menagerie. And he always writes in the corner, Haludar, painted by Haludar. He very consciously was keeping the work of this artist named and not anonymous.
Hmm. And then the wonderful Fuzzy Bear. And this, when you see this in the flesh, we know that the brushes they used to be squirrel's hair. Is that right? So in order to capture the extraordinarily fine detail, I mean, each hair of this Fuzzy Bear.
A single hair of an Indian squirrel is used to paint this. And this Fuzzy Bear looks as if he stood on an electric cable or something. His hair is oscillating out. No, this is fantastic.
So now we move to Calcutta again with Sheikh Mohammed Amir, another great name. I mean, coined by Jonathan Jones as the Stubbs of India, because he was particularly good at painting horses. This is an image that is both haunting and fascinating, and I think brings out many sides of and many angles in the way one could approach this style of painting and the image. But the idea of this young girl being taken for a walk by her servants, protected from the sun with this sun parasol, and then her bonnet, and the fact you can't see her. And you explain that very beautifully, this sort of almost dehumanizing her.
Yes, I mean, you can read this painting in a number of ways. Why are the servants given full face characterization? And, one can feel what the different guys around the Memsahib are like. One is smiling at the back, the other one slightly more serious looking at the front, and they've got individualization. They are characters. But the Memsahib, the little girl on with the bonnet on the horse, has no faith. Now, is that respect of a Muslim artist for the female form, and he doesn't want to show a woman? Is it he doesn't quite regard her as human? Is it that she's somehow a sort of alien creature in this foreign clothing? Is it a sort of form of resistance even that he very rarely shows his foreign patrons, and we don't know quite now. There is a legend, and no one knows whether this is true, that Sheikh Mohammed Amir of Carrier is just around the corner from Park Street, and he may have been the son of Sheikh Zainuddin, the Impi artist, who was based in Park Street when he was painting the Impi pictures. Carrier and Park Street are adjacent areas, so the same family of sheikhs could have been involved, but we just don't know whether that's true.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing is that it could be just a snapshot of daily life that wanted to be captured, and it's about people's employment, or the professions of these people who are specifically employed to take the young men for some a kind of walk. But there is this sort of fascination with Sheikh Mohammed Amir for transportation. And maybe, you were saying that certain castes or certain professions, they tend to do the same thing over again. And maybe these artists tend to specialize in their own genre, like we have still life painters or figure painters or history painters. But this, for me, is another great masterpiece. This English gig that would have been made presumably in England and then imported into India and then used as like a Porsche would be by the young Arabs that drive around Mayfair today. But it's again an astonishing image, and yet where is the other wheel? Why is there just one wheel represented? So again, what is that? What's going on there visually?
And it reminds me very much of the great wheels of the Sun Chariot at Konarak, one of the great masterpieces of Indian art. And so, it's very easy to see this in that tradition of Indian painting of the wheels and the transport of the sun. And I don't think, funny enough, I think this was definitely made in Calcutta, because if you look, it's got a grill on the window. So I think this is definitely the sort of thing that Indian artists and Indian craftsmen were learning to make from European models in Calcutta.
That's interesting. And then this wonderful image of two dogs. Whose names I've suddenly forgotten, but we know exactly who they are.
General and Aya. On the left we have General, the male dog, and Aya, is his girlfriend, nice collar, sitting on the right. And they're wonderful. I mean, very much the type of pariah dog you see all over India to this day, and but very handsome and gorgeous images. I love this. Now, this is again Yelapa of Vellore, the guy with the pot marks at the beginning that we saw. And he was very much did these sets of group images of types. So you have lines of soldiers lined up. These are groups of pujaris at a temple, different forms of holy men and their wives paired off. And I say these works were known for many years. The collection, this one's from I think the BM, there's others in the V&A. But we didn't know the name until this recent album came up at Sotheby's. And there at the back was the self-portrait, Yelapa Puchamunchi. And
so, I mean, that's almost a sort of anthropological question, but do you think for anybody who's studying pujaris or ascetics or holy men, sadhus, are these images extremely useful in terms of historical accounts of showing how people used to dress, or do you feel that you still see people like this in certain parts of India?
No, I mean, a lot of this is dying, and you're quite right. In India, a lot of the interest in company painting has come from people who are interested in lost styles of dress, lost forms of textile, and so on. And these are used as accurate documentation today for the history of dress. At the time, this type of painting, while you certainly get the impression that that the artists are being are under their own steam, they're going around offering to paint these types for the transient populations of colonials coming in and out of towns like Vellore and Tanjore. They were also very interested in the different grades and types of society, the different castes and forms of religiosity, and how far it comes out of the interest of the artist and how far he's being, originally dictated to these things by colonial patrons is very difficult to say now. But Yelapa comes at the beginning of this tradition, different caste paintings. Here, again, with the same precision and the different uniforms, different regiments. And it's quite fun to set off the different uniforms of the different regiments in the East India Company Army to the different castes in the temple and the different forms of pujaris, each with very specific uniforms. And here is the company commandant, the presumed patron of the album. And what's interesting is that all the palanquin carriers have a version of Yelapa's own face. Yelapa gives his own a version of his own face to each one of these. You see, each one is the same guy. Someone's just pointed out, yes, indeed, that the last picture is the cover of the Anarchy, and the one I chose for the.
This is a very interesting image, which a lot of people, coming to the exhibition are, quite surprised that we chose to show this page of this Englishman being transported, looking rather glumly and bored as these men are, suffering as they're carrying this heavy weight across the streets of India. There's an anecdote that these men were incredible runners and they could cover long distances in very little time, which is astonishing. But within you could start seeing this as either a critique of this man and his white sort of status versus the Indian, or you could see it in another way, whereby these are the professional carriers, and this indeed is a book about different professions and different sort of skills within Indian society. How do you see this image? How would you interpret it?
Well, the palanquin is not something that the colonials invented. It was something that was there in Indian society long before the colonial period, and you find it in the Mogul period, particularly for women. So this was, I don't think, would have been read as a colonial painting to Indian eyes at the time. This was just the way people got around, and I think one can, in a sense, overinterpret it with our sensibilities today.
Because I was fascinated.
No different from a picture of a rickshaw today, but for the people in the 18th century.
Yeah, but I suppose just seeing a white man surrounded by Indians carrying him, it can bring out the side of the East India Company that you've so well articulated in your book. But I was I love comparing and contrasting, and with this is my area of speciality, the Spanish painter Francisco Goya, which shows a donkey carrying a reliquary, a coffin with the relics of a saint, and all these people around in the street are prostrating before the relics. But of course, the donkey thinks that they're all praying to him because they're also on their knees. And Goya always liked to use the donkey as a sort of allegory of human stupidity. And I couldn't but sort of resist to compare this man being carried through the streets of India with people maybe paying homage to him, and yet the donkey here. There's a bit of satire, I would say, a bit of wit, perhaps, from Yelapa's point of view. Do you think that's...
Yeah, no, I think Yelapa is definitely an artist with a sense of humor. Also with a sense of status. I mean, that picture of him with his two assistants that we saw at the beginning is a man that, whatever his caste, is enjoying authority, status, and agency. Yeah, no, I think he's acutely aware of different status within people in his pictures.
So now we move on to Delhi, which is, of course, one of the sort of almost last places that the East India Company were able to take over. And on taking over, of course, they would have discovered the great sort of Mughal architecture, both in Agra, Fatehpur Sikri, in this case, the wonderful mausoleum in the courtyard of the Great Mosque, and then, of course, Delhi itself. And here we have an interesting sort of relationship between the patron and artist, whereby it's almost sort of recording this beautiful architecture. Do you think, can you apply the same sort of formula as the wonderful images of flora and fauna that we've seen so far?
Well, we know, no, I think, again, this is different. This is more like Sheikh Mohammed, Amir and Yelapa, in that this was an artist who was not working for commission. It was someone who set himself up as a jobbing artist and sold to passers-by. In this case, he's a guy called Sheikh Latif, who probably did this, certainly signed other similar images. And we know a little about him because the traveller Fanny Parks talks to him and interviews him when she goes to Agra. And he'd basically set up a little business. He was descended, he claimed, from the architects of these buildings. His ancestors, he said, had helped make the buildings for the Moguls. And now, 100 years later, he was making European-style elevations of them, perhaps influenced by the work of the Daniels, who'd come here with a camera obscura 10 or 15 years before these pictures were painted. And who definitely changed, the Daniels' work was observed by local painters, and both Sheikh Latif and Ghulam Ali Khan seem to have had some relationship with the Daniels. We know, for example, that the young Ghulam Ali Khan seems to have worked in the entourage of the Daniels, and a version of a Daniels picture was found in Ghulam Ali Khan's collection. Utica Sharma has written very interestingly a paper on this. So this was an artist not immediately responding to a direct commission from a colonial patron. This was a guy setting himself up, selling things for tourists. So he, just like you go to Agra today and people will offer you boxes made in Pietra Dura work or postcards or pictures of the monuments. So this was the first generation of these guys. And Sheikh Latif had these on sale in Agra and would sell you individual pages or indeed an album, depending on your budget and your pocket.
And and it wasn't just Mughal architecture; they also included Georgian church-style churches. In this case, this wonderful view of is it St James's Church? I can't remember.
St James's Church. So this is Ghulam Ali Khan, who is a very interesting artist in Delhi. As I say, Utica seems to have proven now that he worked as a boy with the Daniels and their camera obscura. Later, I found a reference in the Palace Intelligence, which was the diary of the Mughal court, to him being not only Bahadur Shah Zafar's painter, but also his architect. And when Zafar wanted to put up a hunting lodge in Maroli, he called for Ghulam Ali Khan to make plans. So this is a guy who claimed to, in one of his paintings, to be from Palace born. In other words, from a line of painters who worked for the Mughal court. His descendants, who are still around in Delhi, claim to be descended from Mansoor, who was the great artist at the court of Jahangir. And here at this time, when the Mughal court was running out of cash, Ghulam Ali Khan worked not only for Bahadur Shah Zafar and for his courtiers like Nawab Judger, but also for these new Anglo-Mughal dynasties who were popping up around Delhi. And this painting was done for James Skinner, who was the half Scottish, half Rajput mercenary who fought first for the Marathas, then the company. He also worked for James and William Fraser, and the Fraser album images and some of the other great masterpieces of the show are not painted by Ghulam Ali Khan himself, but were painted, it is almost certain, by members of his family. Certainly in Ghulam Ali Khan's hand, we have a next generation of copies of the Fraser album. So the suggestion is that the Fraser album master, whose name is not known, was probably a generation above Ghulam Ali Khan in the same painter family. And for some reason, his name was not recorded. But I would have thought it's almost certainly the father or the uncle of Ghulam Ali Khan. Ghulam Ali Khan's nephew is Mazhar Ali Khan, who may or may not be the painter we saw at the beginning with the painting propped up on his knee, who worked also with Skinner and who did the great Delhi panorama now in the British Library.
The astonishing portraits, really, of the people of that area. And I mean, in this case here, we have Kala in his having just killed a tiger, and then in his Skinner's sort of costume that, this is a military costume that have been probably imported from Napoleon's forces.
Well, it's a better story even that, because William Fraser, who commissioned this picture, had a big Napoleon crush. Although Napoleon obviously was the great enemy of Britain at this time, many individual Britons admired his chutzpah and skill. And when William Fraser heard that the elderly Napoleon had been left without a library, if you just go back to that last picture again, had been left without a library in St. Helena, he sent his Oriental library to Napoleon and it sank en route. But Napoleon heard that it had been sent and sent back to William Fraser his signet ring and a bust of himself by Canova. And this actually reached Delhi. And when, after Fraser's death, the 1857 uprising took place, the bust of Napoleon was sitting in the Napoleon Gallery in Metcalfe House, where it was looted. And it disappeared after the uprising. No one knew where it went. And then 2 years later, it was discovered being worshipped as Mahadev, one of the forms of Shiva, in a temple in Delhi. And so Napoleon's final avatar was as this perhaps due to his slightly sort of phallically bald head of the dome of Napoleon, was worshipped as a Shiva lingam, which is the apotheosis that you and I can only dream of, Xavier.
One day.
But this was definitely William Fraser sort of doing tribute to Napoleon in this quasi-Napoleonic act. And there's more Skinner's horse. You see, the character on the right, interestingly, not only has the Skinner's horse outfit, but he also has this Napoleonic Shavite thing going on in his dress. So he has a tiger skin. Tiger skins are associated with Lord Shiva, plus the Shavite half-moon symbol at the top of the hat on the right. So this is sort of half Shavite and half Napoleonic, not a conjunction one has seen often.
No, it's absolutely astonishing. And again, worthy of another PhD on military costumes in early 19th century India. And then this is another one that absolutely fascinates me. This is a group of Sikhs, and of course, the Punjab was one of the last parts of India to be sort of fall. But there was a lot of negotiations that William Fraser himself, is that right, was very much involved.
Correct. William Fraser used these partly for just the purposes of his brother, who wanted to paint accurate pictures of Delhi costume in a series of lithographs that he was planning. And that was the original reason for the album being commissioned. But William also clearly used them rather like a headmaster might use an album of photographs to learn the names of all the pupils in his school. So if you look at the top here, you'll see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And each one of these guys is an individual. This is not a type. This is not, a fakir or a nawab. It is specifically a individual who has been painted. Up to this point, only dignitaries have been painted in Indian painting. We don't know, what a yeoman farmer looked like, except as a generic type. But the Fraser album contains a whole range of different social status. So this is a mendicant named Lakshman Das. It's not a sadhu, it's specifically Lakshman Das. And if we go back again to the last picture, the Sikhs, bizarrely, the guy fourth from the left is the direct descendant of my landlady in Delhi today. These are actual individual families and known. These are all descendants of the Maharaja of Patiala.
And then I couldn't resist but showing this. This is something that I find absolutely fascinating to see this sadhu devouring a sheep live and pretty much telling you all the different steps in order to do it and try it at home as such, where you've got a list at the bottom that says, this is the first position, a bit like a yoga positions. This is the first position, second position, third.
I think it's more like a Kama Sutra, man.
Right,
the incredibly detailed anatomical steps to disembowel the sheep.
So we were very unsure about putting this in, but we felt that it very much was part of the sort of British desire and fascination to understand Hindu religion, but in this case, tantric religion. I mean, this is, maybe you should explain the sort of ritual behind this.
Well, no one knows for sure, but Jerry Losty, the great scholar who worked at the British Library Indian collection, Jerry's written a very interesting paper where he suggests that the village that this man is known to have come from had a temple to Narasimha, one of the incarnations of Vishnu, who disembowels the Hiranyakshipu. Hiranyakshipu, am I pronouncing it correctly? One of the demons of Indian mythology. And he was, and Narasimha famously pulls the Hiranyakshipu's stomach out and disembowels him in a particularly unpleasant manner. And one suggestion that Jerry has is that this could be some form of devotion to Narasimha, that the sadhus who followed his path in this tantric rite disemboweled sheep in the same manner. It's a suggestion, but it's quite a clever one.
And I particularly love the detail of him eating cowstick leaves in order to help the digestion, the early form of gathering. I couldn't, but I really wanted to show you this image. I mean, of course, you know it well, but it's just one of the most beautiful portraits, again, of the exhibition. And just the delicacy of this old man, the wisdom behind that face, the also what he wears, that very flowery embroidered shawl. It's again one of these images that you sort of, this is before photography. This is something we have to remember. This is before photography was invented and was used. This is how you captured these extraordinary types of people. And then I just wanted to finish with this one here, Willie. This is, of course,
Fraser's family. So
yeah.
William Fraser, like many East India Company men, had a BB. Well, according to one source, he had more children than the King of Persia from a whole variety of women. But back again, sorry, Amir in this picture is the one we know about. And that is Fraser's daughter sitting to the right, or standing to the right of Amir, and indeed Amir's father and mother. This tall figure looking directly at the camera, and the woman, hang on, back again, and the bearded woman on the right. So this was the last moment that you get still this, developing Mogul style. And what happens finally in the last room of the exhibition is you begin to get Mogul artists consciously leaving their Mogul training behind and attempting to paint the picturesque in the manner of Hodges or the Daniels. And this is the beginning of what, in a sense, happens next. In the Victorian period, with the period of John Locke Kipling and the art schools, you have Indians being trained and taught to abandon their own way of looking at the world, their own techniques, their own styles, and to paint in the manner of Victorians. So by the time you get to Raja Ravi Verma, for example, you have a Victorian sensibility infusing everything that he's doing, however much it comes from a believing Hindu's easel. And Sitaram is the beginning of this. There's very little Indian left in Sitaram's vision. This is very much the picturesque as envisaged in the 18th century. So we end with these last three, really giving a kind of elegiac closure to this show, because we see this as the last great hybrid moment of Mogul art. For all that it's commissioned by the East India Company, these are Indian artists, these are Indian artistic sensibilities at work. Many of them are commissioning themselves to do things in the hope of selling it to European patrons. They're not actual direct commissions. And I think this is a period of art that needs celebrating. And the response to the show from people from all backgrounds and all different nationalities, I think is evidence of how fine and great these artists are.
Well, thank you so much, William. I have to say that the catalogue can be acquired online. If you go to the Wallace website, you will be able to get the full sort of explanation, and also get an idea of how much there is in this exhibition, which is selling out every day. Just to be aware that we can only fit 55 people per day because of social distancing. So if you do want to come, do plan your visit and book ahead. But I think really we should end here, William. Again, a very big thank you, and I look forward
feel that having been disturbed so much during the thing by William, that we should at least have the chance to see this parrot who's been wreaking havoc in the house while I've been talking. He's knocked over everything on the floor. You can see the damage he's created. Here he is, hiding at the back here, trying to destroy the teapots of the house.
Well, thank you. On that note. That's a very kind of...
Sheikh Zainuddin would have painted a very good parakeet if he'd had the chance.
Andrew, do we have time for quick questions?
I think we've got time for just perhaps 2 or 3 very quick questions. The first actually has just popped up, and probably for William, were there female artists of this period operating alongside
the one? Not many. But we know, certainly when I was working on white Moguls, am I in the right place here? Am I upside down or inside out? I hope I'm the right way around. When I was writing white Moguls, there's a moment when Sharaf-un-Nisa, the grandmother of Khair-un-Nisa, gets into correspondence with her granddaughter, Kitty. And she says very explicitly in her Urdu letter, written from a harem in Hyderabad, I will get a female artist to come and paint my portrait. So they existed. We know they existed. And It's often said that images of Mogul beauties are generic pictures of beauties, but I suspect that many of them are portraits and we just don't know the details.
Thank you. And another question, I suppose, relating to property taken by the company. Well, in what way was intellectual property taken? For instance, was medical knowledge taken and returned to the UK?
Well, it's a very interesting question. I mean, the book I'm writing at the moment, funnily enough, is about Indian knowledge diffusing out into the world. Buddhism going north, Hinduism, and the Indian astrological sciences going east towards Angkor Wat and the whole of Southeast Asia. And then Indian numerals and Indian mathematics going first to Baghdad and hence from there to Renaissance Europe. Fibonacci of the Fibonacci sequence was the man who popularized Indian numerals and brought them to Tuscany, to Pisa. There were things that the company learned from Indian sciences. For example, in some parts of astronomy, Indian astronomers knew of more of the moons of Saturn than were known at the West. And Warren Hastings' great friend Thomas Dean Pierce had a dialogue with Mughal astronomers who were ahead of Europe in some things. But in general, this sort of period of mutual artistic influence that we see at the work in this set of pictures marks, in a sense, the end of this period. And by the early 19th century, Europe is imposing its ideas on India and the colonized world. And so just like you move from this hybrid art to just Western being, and Indian artists being encouraged to paint in a Western style. So the interest in Indian science diminishes in the 19th century. And it's only in the 20th century again that people begin to show an interest in Ayurveda and the many extraordinary discoveries of Indian medicine and Indian science.
Brilliant, thank you. And I can see that we're overrunning now, so I think that's as many questions as we have time for today. But on behalf of the Wallace Collection and everybody who's tuned in to join us today, thank you so much to William, thank you to Xavier, and indeed thank you to William the Parrot for his little interludes as well. So thank you so much, everybody, for joining us.
See you soon. Thank you.
Thank you.